Let's take a look at Quasar's date component. I think you're going to love this. Q-date, and that's all we need to do to get this beautiful date picker. And if we come in here, we can actually model something too by saying v-model is equal to selected date. I'll come down here and I'll import ref from view, and then we can come down here and say const selected date is equal to an empty ref. Now I can easily select a date. And just to see what we're working with, let's add in a pre-tag and then paste in the result of that selected date here. And now we can see the date that's selected. So at the moment, it's going year, month, day. However, in Australia, we actually go day, month, year, which is the reverse of this. So let's come up here and change the mask. Mask is equal to, and since Australia goes day, day, month, month, year, 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 that's what we're going to do. Refresh the page, and there we go. It's really easy to basically change the format of the date by using the mask property there. And if you check out Quasar's docs and search for format for display, which is spelled like this, format for display, then you'll be able to see the different options that you have available for your mask in the date. There's actually an amazing amount of flexibility you can have for your date mask. Now, one cool thing about Quasar is that the API is really consistent across the date and the time component. So if we come down here and say Q-time, and then we do the same thing, we're also going to model select a date, and we're going to have the same mask there. And let's just change the mask actually a little bit so that it includes time by saying hour, hour, minute, minute, second, second. And you want to make sure that your hours are capital, your minutes are lowercase, and your seconds are lowercase. So let's save that. They've both got the same mask. Now I can choose a date, and by default, we get this time of 000, but then I can come in here and select a time as well. And there we go. Now the time shows up. And if I want seconds to come up here, then we can also say with dash seconds. And now we can choose a date and then a time all the way down to the second. How cool is that? So it's really easy to combine these two components and make a selector that's very specific. And later on in this video, I'm going to show you how you can combine these two with an input component to make a really flexible, nice UI experience for users selecting a date and a time. All right, let's take a look at what else we can do. We can come in here and say multiple if we want to be able to select multiple dates. And let's change this to an array by default since it is multiple. And now I can come in here and select more than one date. Now you might want those dates to be ranges, so we can come in here and say range. And now when I select one date, I can then select another later on, and we're going to get a range. And you can see here, the modeling is from and then to. And it turns out this actually works really nice with multiple as well. So we can say multiple here, and this kind of blew my mind, by the way. And now I can just click here twice to select 4, click here twice to select 18, or if I want to get a range, I can select from there to there. And now we've got plain dates mixed with a range of dates as well. Isn't that amazing that we get that functionality out of the box? I certainly think so. And now you could, for example, just copy that and you could just paste it directly in here, refresh the page, and you can see it ends up with that same selection. Magical. We can also change the default view by saying default year month. I'll show you what I mean. Let's get rid of these two for now, and we'll say default year month. And I might just change this to an empty ref now. And we can say here, for example, now 2022/6. And there we go. Now we've got June by default rather than April. And if we go back here, we can see that April is actually what the date is at the moment. Now, another cool thing is we can actually constrain the date that the user can select by setting a minimum year and a minimum month. So check this out. I can say navigation min year month, and then we can set that to something like 2022/1. So basically January in 2022. And then we can do the same thing for max. And then we can say only take me to the 6th month. So let's refresh the page. Notice that I can go back to January, but it won't let me go any further back. But then we can go forward to June, and it won't let me go any further forward. And this even maps onto when you click on June and are able to select the month here, we can't go back any further. These ones are disabled. And same with years. We can't actually select any of these other years now. So we get some amazing control over constraining what dates can be selected. We can also change the default view here. So if I come in here and say default view, and let's get rid of these two. By default, that's going to be calendar. So notice that that doesn't actually change anything because we get that calendar view by default. But we can come in and say months. And now we're going to get the month views by default. And then, of course, we've also got years as well. So we get that years view by default. So that's good to know, especially if you want the user to be able to basically select a date that may be further into the future. For example, setting a birth date, you might want to set the default view to years so they can easily just go back here. And in my case, I would then go 1991, and I could then hone into my birthday. Really easy with the date picker component. All right, let's remove that. So we're back to a simpler example. And then we can add in here events. Now, events are really cool. Basically, they allow you to highlight certain events on the calendar component. So we can say here, events is equal to, and then just feed it an array of events. So I might even just come in here and say const events, and we'll set that equal to an empty ref. And we'll throw some events in there. So how about we say 2022/4/5, and we want this to follow what we have in the mask. So what I might do is actually remove this mask because this is the default mask that we get inside of Quasar's date component. So we'll do a couple more. We can say 18, and let's do 22. Something like that. And now we'll come in here and say events is equal to those events. Let's refresh it. And there we go. Notice that those events are now emphasized via this little icon at the bottom there. Now, it turns out this can actually be a function as well, which could be particularly helpful. So let's come in here and say function date is event. And then that's going to take in the date. And I might even just be able to say date here. Oh, we'll say current date just in case we end up with a clash at some point. So we'll throw that in there. And then we can basically do a test here to see if the date is an event. So I'll grab that function date is event and throw it in there. It's going to feed it the current date that it's testing. And then we can say, for example, current date. And if we say 9, then it's going to say 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, the last number here. And we can say if that is equal to a 3, then it is an event. So let's save it. And notice that everything where the last number is a 3 is then going to be showing up as an event. So how cool is that? We get that extra flexibility. You might have like your own way to test events. Like it might be a certain day of the week, for example, that you want to show an event for. So you can really easily do that using the date is event function and just feeding that through to events. We can also change the color of those events. So let's say event-color, and I'll set that equal to red. Refresh the page, and there we go. We get red for events. And this can also be a function. So let's add a colon there. And how about we call this getEventColor. So now I'll come in here and create a function for that. Function getEventColor, which will take in the current date that is fed through there. And what I might do is say, if it's a specific date, then make it red, otherwise make it blue. So how about this? We return an array, and we'll say anything inside of this array is going to make that event red. So what are some of the events that we have? Well, one of them will be 20, 22, 4, and then 13. So I know that's going to be an event because we've got this test here, which tests for the last number being 3. And then I can say dot includes current date. So basically, if the current date is inside of this array here, then I want you to make it red. Otherwise, I want you to make it blue. So let's save that. And there we go. That specific date is coming out red and the others are blue. And you'll notice that if I go to the next month, then they're all going to blue. They're all going to be blue because we only made it this specific date here. So that's kind of cool that we get total control over the colors of the events as well. And another thing we can do is say which of these dates is selectable. So let's create another function here to basically test if a date is going to be selectable. So we'll say date is, how about enabled? Selectable is probably good, actually. Selectable. I think that's a nice specific word for it. Once again, we take in the current date, and then we can return. And how about we use Quasar's date library for this? So what we can do is check for the day of week and check if it's a certain day of the week. And if it is that day of the week, then it's selectable. I'll show you how we can do that. So let me just comment that out. I'll come in here and then we'll say import date from Quasar, because Quasar's got this really cool date utility library. And I happen to know that one of the utilities available in there is called get day of week. So basically we're going to pluck this function out of Quasar's date utility library. And then what I can do here is return get day of week, current date. And if the day of week for the current date is equal to, how about 5, then the date is selectable. All right, so we've got a nice function that's going to do that. Let's scroll up, and then we'll come in here and we can say options, and then pass through that function. Refresh the page, and there we go. They're the only selectable dates, and these ones aren't going to work. So it has to be the 5th day of the week, or actually I think that's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so technically 5 is the 6th day of the week. Then it's going to be selectable. And then if we were to change this number to something like 0, then only the 1st day of the week will be selectable. Oh, maybe I said that wrong. Let's try 1 here. There we go. 1's working. And it looks like 0 doesn't. So how do we get Sunday? Maybe Sunday's 7. Yeah, there we go. Interesting. And of course, this can actually be an array as well. So let's come up here and I'll just quickly show you what that would look like. You could just give it an array and say, I only want you to be able to select 2022 for 23. Let's try that. I'll have to comment this out, save it, and I'll have to comment these out as well. And there we go. We've only got that option available. I'm going to bring us back to a much simpler example just to remove a bit of the cognitive overhead here. Yeah, we'll get rid of that as well. By the way, take a look at Quasar's date library when you get the chance, because there are some amazing things you can do with that library. And because of the way you can just structure the functionality out of that library, you always end up with a really tiny footprint if you use Quasar's date library correctly. So definitely check out Quasar's date utility library. You might not need to. In fact, there's a great chance that you will not need to bring in your own date library like Day.js or Moment. So that's really good to know. So we'll get rid of all of this as well. So we're back to a simpler example. And another thing I'll show you is we can say first day of week. There it is there. And we can set that equal to something like 3. Refresh the page. Now notice that Wednesday is now the first day of the week. And if I make that a 4, of course, now Thursday is the first day of the week. So that's kind of cool to know as well. This kind of thing is really difficult to build on your own. So it's wonderful that Quasar's got this date picker component available to us. Okay, let's take a look at more display stuff. We can say here title to change the title that we get, and that can be something like scheduler. Refresh the page, and now we get that as the title. And then of course you'll notice that we've got this subtitle up here as well. So we can say subtitle and set that equal to something like pick a time that works for you. And there we go. We get that as a subtitle. But notice when I select the date, it doesn't actually change any of these two values. Whereas if I get rid of them, selecting a date is actually going to show it in the top and bottom there. So you may or may not want to have a title and a subtitle. Totally up to you. I actually like to leave them out so that they get this this visual cue of what the date looks like at the top. But I guess it depends on your use case. Another thing we can do is say today-button. And that gives us this button that we can select, which will take us straight to today. That can be handy. We can also change the interface to make it minimal. This is almost like making things dense. Just makes it take up a little bit less space, so that's really nice. We can also say landscape here if you want the space to be taken up a bit differently. And that means some of the functionality is then put onto the left side. We can also say years in month view. So when you're in the month view, the years are going to show up. I'll show you what I mean by that. If we click on here, notice that we can only select the months and not the year. You can actually make it so the years show up at the top here as well, which is really handy. I actually like to enable this. So let's say years in month view, refresh the page, and there we go. Now we get this year selector at the top. So I would recommend usually enabling this because I think it's just a nicer experience for the user to be able to select the year at the top there if they need to. We can also change it to a Persian calendar. Now, I have no idea what this actually means. I'm sure if you understand what a Persian calendar is compared to what I'm used to, then you know what this is about. So that option's available to you as well. I'm sorry I can't give more context on this. We can also say read only. And this is really nice if you just want to display a date. So I can't actually select anything here. Great for displaying. And usually read only might be really nice using the minimal interface. So that's something to think about. And another thing we can do is disable. Disable. So disable is a little bit different to read only because basically it's trying to tell you you're not allowed to enter data here. To me, it's kind of more of a way of saying, hey, you can't actually enter a date here because you need to do something else first. That's usually when you'd use disable. And read only is more, hey, this is something that is displaying information to you. So if you're displaying information to the user, disable probably doesn't make a lot of sense. It's usually more to inform the user that they need to take some sort of other action in order to change the date, or maybe they don't have permission to change the date. Okay, let's move on to some styling. We can come in here and say the color is equal to red. That's going to give us a nice red color. And another thing we can do is set the text color to something different. So if you wanted like a Christmas theme, you could change that to green, which is going to look atrocious, I'm sure. Yeah, that looks terrible. So you could say, for example, red-2 maybe. Yeah, I reckon that looks kind of nice. It sort of makes it blend in slightly more with the background of that red color. You can also make these edges more rigid by saying square. And this is common Quasar stuff. You'll see this API consistent across all components where you've got square, you've got flat, you've got bordered. So I'll show you those as well. We've got flat. Let's also take a look at bordered. And that gives us that little border around the edge there. Actually, I really like this design. So if you want to have more of a flat design for your website, it might make more sense to use flat and bordered in a lot of places rather than Quasar's default shadowing. Totally up to you. Now, I'll give you an example using a method on this component because often it's useful to know how to tap into methods. The calendar component does have a few methods available to you. I'm just going to show you the set calendar to method, which allows you to set the calendar to a specific date. I'll show you what I mean. So let's come in here and say const calendar component is equal to ref. And then I can come up here and say ref is equal to calendar component. And what that means is view behind the scenes is going to automatically set this ref to the component of that same name. So since these two names match, basically that ref is going to become this component. So just to give you an example of that, let's come in here and say function, and we'll do that function where we can say set calendar to next year. And there we go. Now we can actually grab this component here and say .value, which is now equal to the component itself. So we can now start calling methods on this component. And then we'll say set calendar to. And as this function suggests, we want to set it to next year. And I'll just hard code that for now, which will be 2023 by the time of this recording. And then for the second parameter, I'm going to say 01. So the 1st of January, 2023. Now we can come in here and say Q-button. And then when you click on this button, we're going to call that function, set calendar to next year. All right, and we might even put a label in there. Label is equal to next year. Now when we select that, it's going to call the function on the component, which is then going to set it to next year. Honestly, I probably could have done this inline. So I could have just said here, when you click on that, take this component, and then call this setCalendar2 method. There we go. So we can now remove that function. And let's see if that works. And it does. You can jump into the Quasar docs and then have a look at the API card for the calendar component and jump to the methods section to see what other methods you've got available to you there. Anyway, moving on. Let's have a look at how you might use QDate inside of a form. I'm going to remove that and I'm going to wrap this inside of a Q-form component. And then what we might do is throw a button in there, Q-button, and we'll have to set the type equal to submit. And let's give it a label equal to submit. There we go. Now notice when I click on this, we get that little question mark up here showing that the form has been submitted. However, there's no data being sent through. And the reason that's not being sent through is because any component that is inside of a form needs to have a name as well. Otherwise, that form doesn't know how to identify the data from that component. So we can say here name is equal to date, save it, and now when we click on submit, I'll just refresh the page there, it's going to say date is equal to and then the selected date. We haven't selected one, so let's do this again after selecting a date and press submit. So if you're doing AJAX requests, this is not actually relevant, but if you're using Quasar, especially in UMD mode in applications, sometimes you're going to need to actually have this in a native form. And that's how you can basically submit to the page using one of Quasar's components like the date component. Now, the last thing I want to do is build a really cool component, which is a combination of an input, the date picker component, and the time picker component. This is a pattern that I often do, which I totally stole from the docs. So let's have a look at what this will look like. Well, first we need our input. So we'll say Q-input, and then this is going to model the date. So let's say selected date. We don't need this anymore, so let's get rid of it. And there we go. That's not looking like much by default, but it does actually work. We can type into it. I'm just going to change the design a little bit and set this equal to filled. There we go. That looks better. Now inside of here, I can close that off. We can say template, and I want to append onto this. An append is going to happen at the end. We'll append the timer component. So basically, I want to have a button that you can click that opens up a dialog that is then going to show you something that you can use to select the time. So let's come up here. We'll change that to a hash so that it's using the append template. And then we'll put an icon in there. And the name of that icon is going to be equal to access_time. Then I'm going to set a class on that equal to cursor-pointer. And that just means that when I hover over this icon, I get that little pointer on my mouse, which lets me know that it is in fact clickable. Next, I want to make a pop-up appear when I click on that icon. So we can easily do that using Quasar's pop-up proxy component, Q-pop-up-proxy. And then inside of there, we can put whatever we like. In this case, it's going to be a Q-date component. Oh, sorry, not date. We wanted this one to be a time component, which is going to v-model whatever our selected date is. So let's see what we've got so far. And there we go, it works. So I don't really like where that's appearing. I think I'd rather just it appears directly over where I clicked. So what we can do is come in here and say cover, and let's change the transition while we're at it. Transition show is equal to scale, and let's do the same for hide. Transition hide is equal to scale. So let's see if that works. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. Now next, let's add in the mask. But since we're going to be using the mask twice, because we'll use it for the time component, but we'll also use it for the date component, I might actually just save it down here in a variable. And it doesn't have to be reactive because this is going to be hard-coded. So let's set that equal to mask. And the mask can be year, month, day, hour, and minute. Let's go with that. Save it. And now we need to actually use that mask. So let's come in here and say mask is equal to that mask. Now when we select something, it's going to show up here correctly. Now we just need the date aspect. So I'm going to actually copy a lot of this because most of the code is the same, which is really cool. And instead of append, we're going to prepend the date component, and we'll change this to an event icon. Let's see what that looks like. So we have the event icon. We'll leave all the code for the pop-up proxy, and we'll change this to a date component now. We're still modeling the selected date, and we're using the same mask there. So that's actually all we had to change. Let's see if this works. We can select a date, and it shows up. And then we can select a time, and then the time shows up. How cool is that? Now, one last thing I want to do, though, is make it so that there's a button that we can click to basically close this dialog, because having to select outside of the dialog is a bit annoying. But before I do that, I just want to show you, if this is on a mobile device, since we're using the pop-up proxy, take a look at this. It changes it to a dialog instead. So when you're on a mobile device, pop-up proxy is going to make it a dialog, but if you're on a larger device like a computer, then it's going to change that to basically something that just shows up in like a mini dialogue. What would you call that? A pop-up, I guess. Yeah, so this is a pop-up, whereas on smaller devices, it shows up as a dialogue. All right, let's add in those buttons. We can come in here and just throw it directly inside of the date. And we'll call this Q-button. I think I want it to be flat. Give it a label equal to close. And then we can use the directive for closing the pop-up, v-close-pop-up. There we go. So let's see if that worked on the date. We can select a date and then press close, and that works. And I'm just going to copy paste that directly inside of the time component. There we go. And then we get the same thing with the time component. How cool is that? This is really cool, by the way. Quasar saves us so much code by giving this v-close-pop-up directive available to us. That basically just bubbles up and says, hey, let's find the closest pop-up and then close it out. This is really handy having this directive available. I love it. All right, so that's about it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. I really enjoyed this one. I think this component's really awesome. And I love that I got the chance to show you as well that there's this amazing synergy between Quasar's date component and the time component. And there's been so much thought. I really want to stress this. This extra thought into the API and keeping it consistent really pays off in situations like this. It means that we know how to make components flat. We know how to make them bordered. We know how to, remove the shadows from things. We know that it's all going to be the same. And in fact, it's so consistent that the code with the time component is almost the exact same as the date component. That to me is the sign of a really beautifully thought out API. So I absolutely love it. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed making it for you. Catch you in the next one where we'll explore something else.